Hello everyone, welcome to EMD Media. EMD Media is working on understanding, measuring, and doing. And it tries to contribute for evidence-based and evidence-rich decision-making and discourse. Those of you who are following us live on YouTube and Facebook, please share, subscribe, like, so that many can access this material. Your host is Getachew Asafa. Stay tuned. Great. Welcome again to EMD Media Show. Today we will be talking about war on Tigray, health and education. It's my great pleasure to have Professor Tony Magaña as my guest today from Florida. Professor Magaña, welcome to EMD Media Show.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So today we'll be talking about war on Tigray. As usual, what I do is I try to introduce or give background to my guests. On top of that, I would be happy if you can add. So in terms of some visuals, my guest today is a neurosurgeon. And those who haven't followed him, you can follow him on Twitter, Tony Magaña. NS, that's his handle on Twitter. He's active also on Facebook. You can see his Facebook address down there, Tony Magaña, and Dr. Tony Magaña is where you can access him on Twitter. And you see on the background, at least what he has now is the Mekelle panorama, and this is on LinkedIn. You can get him Ethiopian Neurosurgeon on LinkedIn. That's his LinkedIn page as well. And he has very actively been writing on a number of dimensions. This is his blog.ethiopianneurosurgery.com. blog.ethiopianneurosurgery.com. That's where you can access his thoughts, his reflections on current situations and in the past as well. And a bit of a bio. So he's the professor and head of neurosurgery, Mekelle University School of Medicine. Has a joint appointment with the anatomy and neuroscience, Mekelle University as well, advising graduate students. He is also affiliated with the St. Gabriel General Hospital, and a theologian as well. We'll talk about the religious dimension as well. That it has been very important in understanding and continues to be important in understanding what's happening in Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia. Mostly in Tigray, but he lived more than 10 years or the past 10 years in Ethiopia. Published in different ways on different topics. You can access his some of his co-published, co-authored works in Google Scholar as well. So my understanding is, Professor, you were in Mekelle until January 30th, the end of January.
Yes.
And there is a good infographics that is issued every day by an activist. I'm happy to call her an activist. Sade in Ontario, Toronto. She maintains this daily infographics. So this was day 88 when your last day, I would say, in Tigray,
Yeah.
and 201 days forward. Today we are on day 289 since the war, and as we can imagine, there is significant shift on what has happened between these 2 days. So first off, let's go maybe back to 10 years ago, or whenever you first went to Ethiopia, to Tigray. Can you paint a picture for us? Take us back to that in time and in space. How did you come to end up in Tigray?
Well, I had a chance meeting in the Addis airport with Dr. Kindeya, who was the president of the university, and also with Adi Salam Bolima, who I think you've met in the past, who was the chairman of the board. And they had gotten some donations for an MRI. They serve a huge area, 10 million people, not only in Tigray, but in the surrounding regions. And they had problems getting neurosurgery started there. At that time, neurosurgery was really just in Addis. And I had tried to get some things going in Dese, but it just, they weren't ready for it. And so I visited, and it looked very promising. And the leaders of the university and the Ministry of Health suggested we go there. So I went there, and we went from nothing to providing a service for about 10 million people. We educated medical students. We trained neurosurgeons. We did research, and we also even began to train some neurosurgeons from surrounding countries at the request of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's been, I had research stations in almost every major city looking at, there's a big problem there, birth defects called neurotubule defects. It's actually all over Ethiopia. But we created a research team, a multidisciplinary research team, and we've published now 6 papers, and it sort of got the world's attention. And up until the war, we were working on a prevention program, which is obviously now on hold. So we did about 15,000 operations. We were doing 1,500. I was training a total of 18 residents, up until the war. Unfortunately, now it's all been disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk about that. So these are some of the residents and fellow, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know? I mean, we'll come to in details, but do you know where the whereabouts of all these people are now?
Well, it's one of the problems is creating documentation. So I've been writing letters, and they want these seals, which are hard to get because Ethiopia you can't communicate with Mekelle. The registrar's office is closed.
Mm.
Some of them have returned back to where they came from. Some have joined the liberation effort. And some are just kind of waiting to see what happens. Some have we have had good cooperation with the faculty at Addis Ababa University to find a place for them at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that is not often mentioned is how the education system transformed over the last, let's say, 30 years, or as Abiy Ahmed and his supporters would call it, the 27 dark years. So when pre-1995, there were Addis Ababa University, there was Alamaya University. And just even looking at Tigray, there was no university pre-1995.
Right.
So the first generation, among the first generation is Mekelle University, which is in green here. And of course, now we have Adigrat University, in the north, and Aksum University here, and the latest addition is Raya University.
Right.
And, you were active in either, right? So you were in the medicine School of Medicine.
Yes. Well, yes. The School of Medicine, part of the College of Health Sciences.
Exactly. So were there any collaborations with the other universities like Aksum and Adigrat?
Yeah, yes. Well, we trained their doctors. There was there was a move to we worked closely with the Tigray Regional Health Bureau and the other universities. We thought of ourselves as one system. So we trained doctors from Adigrat, from Raya. I was involved a little bit in the planning for Raya as well. And we also, through Dr. Kandea, we had connections with Somaliland. We were training doctors for there, with Somalia. And we actually, up until the war, were supposedly in some talks even with Eritrea.
Yeah, Mekelle University, in fact, I mean, I don't have the numbers to show, but it is one of the high-ranking universities in Ethiopia in terms of research, thanks to people like Professor Kandaya, like yourself, and so on. So it's interesting to hear about the collaborations and branching out into connections in other African countries as well. One thing that so November 4, it all started on November 4, but I'm sure for those who were there and those of us who were following from afar, things were not like, they didn't come all of a sudden. So how was it for you, being there, having been there for years? How were the days and weeks to November 4 played out?
We, there's when they declared the TPLF a terrorist group, we knew that there was problems building, and then they started to cut the budget. They cut normally we were used to getting like an 18% budget increase per year, and then they literally started cutting the budget. They started not sending medical supplies. They wouldn't do repairs. This was like for almost a whole year before the day of the war. But I don't think anybody, I went to bed that night, thinking it was going to be a normal day, and we woke up to find out we were in a war, and it took I can't recall exactly how long. It was like a week or so before the Ethiopian forces and Eritrean forces took the Mekelle city, which the TPLF decided not to fight in to preserve the city.
Yeah, actually it was November 28th. So it started on November 4. At least Abiy Ahmed declared victory after the capturing of Mekelle on November 28th. So you were seeing all that from Mekelle, and then until January 30th, you were still there. So what were things looking like?
I would say, for a couple weeks, life was scary, but not much happened. The big change was the morning that the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces were coming in the city. That we knew that the TPLF had left. There was nobody left. There was going to be no fighting, and we thought there would be an occupation. What the scariest thing was, at about 6 a.m, this artillery barrage started. My house was hit. My neighbors were killed. I actually suffered a hand injury from shrapnel for a piece that went through the window. And this went on for 24 hours. And it was not targeted. It just hit the whole city. And, I saw this woman with she had no chest left. Her house was about 100 yards from mine. And her two babies were there with shrapnel on their head. There was another woman whose leg was almost cut off we rushed them to the hospital. I went to the hospital, and the casualties just came in 100 an hour. I mean, we were quickly overwhelmed, and then later we became aware that Eritreans were in the city because I can't speak Tigray very well, but they were coming in sometimes in Ethiopian uniforms, but they couldn't speak Amharic. Nobody in the Ethiopian Defense Force is not going to be able to speak Amharic, and they have an accent that the locals recognize well. And then when the army came, it became very difficult because they were controlling exactly what was happening in the hospital. They were trying to get supplies. The nurses were very brave. They were locking everything up. And then there was this famous thing that I wrote about, which I call the civil nonviolent action, where tens of thousands of Tigray, and I took pictures, but the police took my camera away. But 10,000 people surrounded the hospital. They put burning tires, and they would not let the soldiers in. And they were shooting people. 2 young boys about 10 feet in front of me were shot. But I think the soldiers felt guilty, and they had these Eritreans in plain clothes and trucks, and they just couldn't make it down the street. And this went on for several days because we knew that they were ransacking shops. They were ransacking the telephone service. They were hassling people already. They were hassling women on the street. They were doing things even to the nurses in the hospital. And this was actually started by the mosque. There's a mosque very close to and he went over. He took a great risk. He went over. He had a generator, and over the loudspeaker, he told people to defend the hospital. And then the leaders of the Waredas and the Kabbalah got together and organized this nonviolent protest.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. We didn't hear a lot about that. We knew there were young people saying that we can't, let the military, the army, the Eritreans ransack some of the properties, including maybe the studio of Tigray television, all that, and so on.
Yeah.
This is a lot, a lot to talk about. Maybe we'll try it as well. One thing what happened? Were you not able to leave Tigray or Ethiopia before January 30th?
Well, I told the last, just before the phone went out, actually 30 seconds, I called the American embassy and said, I'm here, but I said, I'm going to stay. I said I would stay as long as I could do something. And then everything was cut off. Even if the only communication we had with the outside world was the World Food Program, but quickly, and also the Red Cross. And I was actually talking with the Red Cross. We were taking care of everybody that was hurt: civilians, Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Eritreans, and Tigray. And the Red Cross was coming as they were supposed to. And then they got upset because I was telling the Red Cross, there's people here, wherever they are, you need to let their families know whether they're Ethiopian or Tigray. And there was like 2,000 diaspora there visiting their families that were trapped. So we wanted to get them out first. And my plan was to stay until the hospital. I stayed until we had no supplies, no electricity, till I just couldn't function anymore. And what happened was they wouldn't let me leave, but there were a lot of Indian workers there that wanted to get out, and they had paid some people to get some small buses, I guess you call them, in. And what happened was my name was added that I was an Indian, and I wore a face mask. And I remember the Ethiopian Defense Force colonel told us, he didn't know I was an American. He said, if anybody asks you why you're leaving, you're saying you're going on a vacation, that everything is fine. So we went through a lot of checkpoints because the bridge was down near Alamata. We had to take this weird way back to go through Desi, and there were some close calls. But so they would play Hindi music, and I'd be dancing to the Hindi music with my mask on, so they didn't know I was an American.
So that's how you made it to Addis and to the US, right?
Yes. Well, I immediately sought refuge in the American embassy, and they said they would get me out, and they got me out.
Great. I mean, it's sorrowful, as I can imagine, how you had to wait all the time, and then there is no supply, there is nothing you can help. So that's where we will be talking about now. So you wrote this on July 30th. This is related to the healthcare, education, and so on, and you call it as part of the Tigray genocide.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, Professor Magaña, when were you able to say what is going on is genocide, given that the government and the network of misinformation and disinformation machinery they have both in Ethiopia and in the diaspora, they still to this day deny that?
Well, I couldn't say anything or do anything until the Tigray retook Mekelle, because we would be very fearful that there would be retributions seen. Even now I get many threats. Every minute I get threats, and so I felt when the resurgence happened and Mekelle was freed, we could start to tell the story about what happened.
Yeah, so that's after June 28, the recapture. I can understand. I have been, speaking with people like, respected people like Mukesh Kapila, medical doctor. I don't know if you know him. He's a very, knowledgeable expert in genocide and so on. So in Geneva, he gets threats from Ethiopians and Eritreans, for speaking up for this. So I totally understand where you come from in that regard. So let's maybe talk about, because you tried not only to write about this, but as we'll see later, you tried to quantify what at least could be expected in terms of death and so on. So can you paint a picture?
Yeah,
how the healthcare looked like before November 4 and what happened after that?
We had a very high level of healthcare. We had the highest level of medically assisted births in Ethiopia. We provided cancer care, trauma surgery, orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery. We were just about equal to Addis. The only thing was, like, we were having a cancer center built with radiation therapy, which has now been stopped. We actually had one of the best MRIs in Africa, which was donated by Tigray diaspora to the university. And now it's nothing. And one of the things that's important to understand is, yes, people have been killed by the invaders. Yes, and yes, people are starving, but it's even more than that. There's a concept called the Crude death rate. And that is a way of measuring how many people normally die in a population. And in Ethiopia in general, it had dropped to 6 per 1,000 per year. But we know, if we go back and look at what the death rate used to be in Ethiopia in the 50s, when there was basically no healthcare outside of Addis, it was as high as 52. And so we think it's probably about 52 deaths, which, if you look at the population of Tigray, which is now a little over 7 million, you're actually looking at 226,000 people. That's what having healthcare saves every year, 226,000 people. Because things like appendicitis, simple pneumonia, there's nothing. People will die of a simple infection. Women will die. They can't have a C-section. You know, they can't get proper care. They'll bleed to death. There's no blood supply. You see in Addis, there's many drives to get blood supply, but none of that comes to Tigray. And there's no equipment or mechanism to even do blood drives right now in Tigray. Mm. And that's probably the biggest use of blood has always been for during delivery.
Mm-hmm. You know, what is sad about this fact is we are not talking a lot about it. We are not even, you know, because we are talking about yes, very important one like the rape, mass rape. We are talking about, you know, people killed in massacres. Very important, no doubt about that. But these days, that's, you know, going in big numbers and might go for years to come, given the infrastructure that took years to build, will not be, you know, set up overnight, right? So I just want to emphasize that where you are talking about comparing 1950s, 1971, and the 2020, where improvements were around 6.29 per 1,000 people.
Yes.
But it can soar to 32 days per 1,000 per year, which you calculated into this. So
yeah.
And do we know already? I know you have been in touch recently, as maybe as recent as yesterday.
Yes.
To the people on the ground in Mekelle and so on. So can you paint a picture what you heard from them?
Well, I mean, right now, you know, there's a lot. They've had no immunization, so these childhood diseases like measles and mumps, they've had an outbreak of rabies. That's because there's even dogs in the city that used to live off garbage and left everybody alone. And they're seeing about 3 cases of rabies a day. Children are starving. The hospital is seeing many people coming in from the countryside, and it's mostly children that are starving because they have the least reserve. You know, children do not tolerate starvation as much as adults. And it's going from it's going to the hundreds. And these are the people that can get transportation. How many in the countryside may be in the thousands. The food distribution is not nearly enough. They have no medications. They have a few IVs left that they're saving for children, but they estimate that they'll run out in a week. They have no working X-ray equipment. They can't do any surgery. They have no anesthetics. Many of the young doctors are supporting the military because at least that's something they can do there. So it's in total shambles. And much of the equipment from the various hospitals, they've all been destroyed. Every piece of equipment has been taken to Eritrea. So, I mean, it's going to have to be almost a rebuild from scratch.
So one thing that is also under your radar is the education system. So given you're teaching at the university, and there are scholars like you from Professor Jan Nissen from Belgium and others who came together to at least get the information out and so on. So what are you learning in terms of students this year, or anything that has been happening since November 4 in terms of students there?
Well, first of all, you know, the whole education system took a tremendous blow from the COVID-19. Many students didn't get education for a year. Now, I mean, there's no money to pay teachers. Teachers and their families are in survival mode. There's no transportation. So the whole education system, all the way up until the university, is destroyed. And on top of that, you know, you got never, from the day the war started, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health gave absolutely no cooperation to Tigray. You know, they kept promising during the occupation before the Tigray resurgence, they promised, oh, we're going to send resources, we're going to send teachers, we're going to send medicines. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. And so now it's just paralyzed. I mean, there's no university, there's no elementary school, and you have to remember that the Tigray were always discriminated against. The only university they were allowed to have before they came to power was this Mekelle business school, and they didn't even want Tigray to go to high school. And that's always been a push by the local government to push education, and that's been totally destroyed.
I'm just wondering, Professor Magaña, you have been, before that, you have been collaborating with others as well. So one thing that came out was how the elite in Ethiopia, including professors in other universities, scholars in and outside universities, have been reacting. So they are in action, and even in some cases, or in most cases, they were appearing as supporters of what's happening in Tigray. So people usually focus on what happened after November 4, to which they are denying a lot, to which they are justifying, all these incredible atrocities against children, women, and so on. On top of that, what you are telling us is the war, in terms of blockade, in terms of budget, in terms of all these health services, it already happened, or it was happening before November 4. So
Yes.
what is your assessment on how the elites of Ethiopia have been responding to what is happening in Tigray?
Well, I think the biggest problem is there's been this double talk. This double talk that Tigray are Ethiopians and we're going to take care of them. The only problem is the TPLF. But the actions speak louder than the words. Like Debretsion said, they want us to say we're a part of them, but they really don't want us. And it is a genocide. And there is, I think there's also, on top of that, there's this religious component, this religious fight, that somehow this genocide is allowable, that somehow, because of some past actions, that somehow genocide is now allowed, and that has crept in. And there's also, frankly, there's been some jealousy about the success and the development of Mekelle University.
I'm just wondering, because I actually wrote a while ago, specifically when you look at the way things were damaged. For example, I saw a picture in Garaalta. So this beautiful, traditional Hidmo, it's not by any means a military target, right. But it was destroyed. So the envy and jealousy factor, I mean, it's hard to measure how big or small is contributed, but no doubt, I hear you loud and clear that what's happening, actually, the Prime Minister said it, unfortunately, now Mekelle is as important as maximum as Bashasha, his hometown.
Yeah.
So it's incredible that the whole law and order operation was, quote unquote, to reduce Mekelle to Bashasha.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a law enforcement operation. It's clearly meant to wipe out people, to take away their spirit, to make them so they don't exist, and no different than any others. And I think that there was this double talk when the administration came, and even the interim administration, and I can't remember the guy's name now. Even he was saying that the federal government wasn't allowing the farmers to plant. And so even the people that Abiy appointed were admitting it. And so it goes far beyond any type of law enforcement thing. And I mean, the things I saw babies where they were trying to cut their heads off. They came from Wukro. We saw women where their vaginas were shot. Somebody put a rifle in their vagina. I saw boys that their penises and testicles were cut off. I mean, this is not a law enforcement operation. Children shot, mothers running away, carrying their children from the scene of combat, just executed. This is not a law enforcement operation.
It can't be. Yes, it can't be. One thing, maybe I want to play. I don't know if you know him, but this is a testimony from one of the people who was working there.
Yes, he's my good friend. Yes.
Okay, let's play that one, and you'll speak to that, Prof.
And I just again moved to the general who led the war also, and with my colleagues, and we moved to that general, and we asked him that we are in a problem. The hospital is collapsing, and we need oxygen in the medicines, and then he just also laughed and he intimidated because you guys have been collaborating with the Alsace region, and then we are not sure that we'll give you because you are the one. So he tried to just intimidate and also some sort of and then we feel that they may also kill us, but in any way, finally we make some sort of points because we told him that if the military is also get injured, so this hospital has communication so that they can give at least some first aid and some medications and some treatments. So based on that, he understand, and then he gave us a few, but medicine is not there, and we told him that we needed medicine because all the drugs have been taken, and he said they took it because they need it, he said. So and then we did it based on that. We got some sort of fuel, and then we start to run a little bit. We got a fuel, and then a little bit few oxygens are produced. But in the meantime, the military came with some two girls, and they just gave them to the ward, and then after they get treatment, the girls have been disappeared. That was a point of, and then the military started fire on the hospital. They said, "Where are the girls?" And we don't know because they have been here and they asked for me. I couldn't find them. But later, because they left, after this military left, I asked the nurses what has happened, and they told me that it is because they are just gang raped by this military. So that was how this raping is starting in early December. So upon that,
So tell us about what he's talking about was happening.
Well, the very first Ethiopian Defense Force guys were slightly reasonable. And then we had like two changes. Some federal police came and they were stricter. And then the Eritreans came and also the Amhara phenotypes came. And now people tried to deny that they were in Mekelle, but they were, because they only spoke Amharic, because they wouldn't speak Tigray. Where the Eritreans, they speak only Tigray. They don't speak Amharic. And it was funny. You couldn't tell who somebody was exactly by the uniform. But yes, they started abusing nurses. The nurses were afraid it got to where they were in every room of the hospital. You couldn't be alone. And then, like, if a victim came in with obvious abuse, they would just take the body. And even they wouldn't let people that were shot. There was a lot of shooting on the street. They would take the body away because they didn't want any evidence. The families would get upset. Even the TPLF or TDF prison of wars they took. and then we never knew what happened to them. And that was escalating. It was escalating every day. The first week it wasn't so obvious, but then there was kind of a change of who the occupation forces was. And even, and people were getting really scared, because they would go house to house. They would pick out a girl and they just take her, and the family never heard from her again. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, no one could have imagined, even when they first came, that this was going to happen. Even you have to understand that when the war first started, we started to get casualties. Ethiopian women, Tigray women, were coming and giving blankets and giving food to the ENDF and even the Eritreans, so saying, "Oh, I hope your family, I hope you survive." I saw that, and yet, then they start to do these terrible things. Even now you see that they're feeding the prisoners in the rehabilitation camps now in Mekelle. They give, food is a scarce thing, and they still give it because that's the Christian thing to do.
Yeah, I hear you. This is a tweet you shared. This was from the former president of the University of Magaña. And it's talking about the same thing, like the basic medical supplies, no medication, occasional electricity, and so on. And some of them, actually, I was contacted by a person who supplies dialysis supplies, all that, and so on. She was talking about a very serious issue right now in Tigray.
Yes, well, there's basically nothing there. There's no medications. They're using IVs just for children that are malnourished, and there's just maybe a few weeks left there. Other than that, they have nothing. And the electricity, they told me that they're trying to get something going with the dam, but the dam has to fill up from the rainwater up a certain amount, and it's not there yet. And the other problem is, there are these windmills by the airport. If you've ever flown there, they were sabotaged by the Eritrean forces, and they took components from them. So they have to get replacement parts to fix those.
So the Ashogoda wind turbines, they were also looted.
Yeah.
What you?
Yes, they were sabotaged and important pieces removed.
That's unfortunate. It's 120 megawatt. It was at least the time it was built. It was the largest in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes.
Wind farm. So that's terrible. One thing that came on the August 8th by Professor Jan Nissen. This is they have a Tigray Digest that comes now every 2 weeks, I guess. So this is the university-focused update they had, including 10,000 students present on campus. The university couldn't feed them because they ran out of stock. The fuel, the employees are not getting paid.
Well, and you know what happened? So when the war started, Fetian she had a satellite phone, which then they were upset that she had it, and they wanted to torture her. She went through some bad times. That we were trying to contact the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education to evacuate students early. And they kept saying, no, everything's going to be fine. We're going to send food. And they never did. They just wouldn't listen. And you know what happened? It's the same story. The Ethiopian families adopted these people, whether they were Oromia, whether they were Amhara, whether they were from the SNNP. they were adopted, and they shared the little food that they had. And this has been well documented, and people have been interviewed when they came back to Addis. You know, so it was the community of Mekelle that saved them. They sacrificed their own things because they felt that they were a treasure.
And from Mekelle, Aksum, and Adigrat universities, students who are not from Tigray, they were sent home with support from the UN and Tigray government, and I think that's something that they couldn't continue because there was short of fuel and cash to transport even whatever they have. So these are the things that.
Well, let me tell you. I don't know if you know this. They also, this is a tricky thing. The Ethiopian government wanted to take Tigray, whose families were in Addis. And what happened was the buses went to Samara, but nobody knows what happened after that. We believe that they've been put in detention centers, and those are the pictures. Some of the pictures you see of the so-called POWs, they've now been recognized to be some of those Tigray University students who were supposed to go to Addis but never made it.
Yeah. In fact, the BBC came with the news yesterday on how, you know, in the propaganda of saying that there are children, soldiers within TDF, they were rounding up kids, and they forced them to do an interview. So the BBC uncovered that story yesterday evening.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know the leaders of the TPLF. I have a very slight military background in the past. Nobody would take children because the TDF is successful because they're well-trained soldiers. They know how to maneuver. Putting somebody underage who's not trained with a gun doesn't help. So there's no reason they'd ever do that.
Yeah, in fact, that's I mean, even from the diaspora, I know people who went all the way to the field to join the TDF, right? So I don't think they have any shortage of people to round up underage kids and so on. But unfortunately, in this denial, you know, justifying and covering up Tigray genocide, the government of Ethiopia is using all kinds of tools. Some of them, you know, they are unheard of, the way they are using them and so on. So it's so sad, and it's very consequential for the whole country. And I mean, before I move on to the religious dimension, which is closer to your heart as well, you have been writing about that, sharing your ideas. Yeah. I just want you to speak to the fact that there are a number of students of Tigray origin all over the country, and we can't even ask, you know, how they are doing, what is happening to them, and what will be next, and so on. So is there anything that you see could happen in terms of helping them and so on?
Well, it's a very delicate issue. Because they're constantly moving them, and because if they identify them as POWs, then by international treaty the Red Cross has a right to see them. But the government is playing this game. Sometimes they're saying they're POWs, sometimes they're saying that they're insurrectionists, so therefore the Red Cross doesn't have a right to visit them. And I think this is why I think they're going to try and use them as some kind of bargaining chip, is my guess.
Actually, someone is just following us, and he's asking about if there is any detail about the boys whose testicles were cut off and so on. Do we have any detail on that? Or?
You know what happened with a lot of those people? they were taken out of the hospital by the forces. I mean, somebody like a mother would come in and claim she was raped, and the next morning she's gone. The soldiers took them away because they wanted to literally bury the evidence of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Do we know the numbers, how many there were and so on, and when was that? I mean, if we want to trace them and so on.
Well, a lot of it happened it increased after the first week because there were resistance movements. You know, like there were 2 boys that were on the bridge that they shot. The local youth groups were sending out unarmed scouts just to be a witness, like to walk women safely, and they were shot on sight. The 2 boys that were shot during the demonstration, like we saw them for a few days, and then they were taken away. And the problem is, even you weren't allowed to write things down. You weren't allowed to write in the record that they were shot by national forces. They even wanted us to write that these were Tigray that the TPLF was shooting. You know.
Yeah, so it's a lot of. I mean, it needs a lot of effort to investigate.
Yes.
Document, track where these are and what happened to them.
Yes.
Yeah, and one thing that the religious dimension. We have been speaking about that here at UMD Media as well. I can see from your blog, you have been from time to time writing about that. So maybe one thing that I have introduced you to your religious connection, but you can speak to that as a background. And then you use here the Clerical Fascism that happened in Europe and how that is happening also as we speak in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So can you, Professor Magaña, talk about your religious?
Well, I'm Episcopalian. I'm still studying today. So it's sort of a co-thing. I study theology. I'm not a minister. I'm not ordained. But this problem of clerical fascism, it's when religion changes, it's trying to get power by supporting the government. And what's happened, it happened in Italy when the Italians came to, this term was actually described, it was first used when Mussolini tried to take Ethiopia, which is interesting. And there are arguments for when force is allowed under Christian doctrine. And those are basically to protect lives, not to take land, not to dominate. And it has to be against an immediate threat. And I've written that you can make this argument that what the TDF is doing is allowable. It's a defense. Offensive action for land, or even you can't use it if you want to accept that there were past wrongs. There are other ways to approach that other than war. And what these people are doing, you know, the only unforgivable sin that Jesus tells us is to say that Jesus is asking us to act like the devil. And that's what they're doing. And that recording of the prophetess Bertukan, she's clearly telling him, do whatever you have to do. God will allow you to do whatever you have to do. That is not Christian by anybody's measure. And if you, I mean, the problem here is that this is widely accepted by many people, because Abiy seems to have this connection. There's this weird alliance between the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, some of them, and these evangelical Christians that are calling for this sort of Christian fatwa, which doesn't make sense, and by anybody who's done any scholarly study of theology.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not even the Protestants only. You know, a significant part of the Orthodox leadership say the patriarch. As you might know, in March there was a message that came out, which is still resonating to this day, given that they were able to silence him for months before that day, and he used that opportunity to voice for the voiceless.
Yeah, and I think if there's anything that's a threat to Ethiopian unity, it's the divisions that have now come in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which used to be one of those things that created a trans-ethnic Ethiopian culture. That's now been destroyed, not by the Tigray, but by Abiy and his supporters.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, the Italian the interwar between first World War and second one, and what happened in Greece and others, there was a trace of this clerical fascism and so on. So, but do we know if that's happening elsewhere as we speak? I'm just looking for examples where religion. You argued that how there is a moral and theological justification for defending oneself, especially fighting evil as mass massacres happening, all that and so on.
Right.
And of course you do it in a fashion that is still morally within that sphere domain and so on. So is there anything that we can learn from elsewhere in how we can change this for the better?
Well, I think it's good, good people let evil exist when they don't speak up. And I think, there's one of the problems with the religious leadership is Jesus. For Christians, Jesus is the leader. For Muslims, the Allah is the leader. And when people start to follow a leader, when he becomes the golden calf, to use the Moses story analogy, then people have to speak up. But what happens is, even now I talk to people that are mad at me from the Amhara region that say, well, they're convinced God is telling them, but they're not really examining their religion and really read the Bible, read about what it says. Try to compare that with what you're hearing.
In fact, it's heartbreaking when we saw that people with crosses on their neck, taking pictures after massacres and so on. So they kill people, like anything, and then they take pictures proudly. And so on. So, and the claim of the double talk you were mentioning in terms of using God or the God factor as the justification for one's evil doing is really we didn't at least expect in this scale in a country where religion is a most important aspect of life.
This is the most shock. I have so much respect for Ethiopian religion, the Tewahedo. It's a very important part of Christianity, and it used to teach tolerance. It lived with the Muslims. It like many religions, there were some problems dealing with the South, but it improved over that. But what we're seeing now, it's a real threat, I think, to the future of the church, letting this influence come in.
On the positive side, though, there is a hope that the way, for example, the Tigrayan religious leaders were, visiting. For example, this is a picture you posted about Isaias, and he went actually with the other leaders as well. So do you see religion, or even after November 4 until you were there, how was religion helping, or faith in general helping the people of Tigray?
Well, I think, I think the way these mothers took care of the prisoners. We talked about it when I was at IDAR, and we were taking care of the Eritrean and ENDF prisoners. The mothers came and gave them blankets. When we see them, when we see them taking care of the POWs in the rehabilitation camp. In fact, the TDF calls it a rehabilitation camp. They're not executing the soldiers. They do want to see the leaders. Even they say the poor farmers are doing what the leaders, they're not looking at this as a genocidal war. It's a war between ethnic groups. And I hope that there will be a spiritual awakening, because that's really what causes an end to war, when people see it's a horrible, horrible thing. And to be a justifiable war, you have to take care of the prisoners. The fighting has to stop when the threat is over, and there can't be retribution.
But for Tigrayans, the problem has been that anywhere they are, be it Addis or very far from Tigray, the government and its supporters are framing it that everywhere is a war zone, and so on. So they are being taken to unknown places. As more than 17,000 of ANDF members from Tigray.
Yeah.
We don't even know where they are and how they are doing and so on. We heard from the Somali region there were
Right.
a number of victims already and so on. So this is the challenge of looking at having the same dimension. Like you said, the mothers of Tigray see when they see a victim. Actually, I heard a television interview where a mom was saying, I cry, my heart cries for those soldiers who are dying here.
Yeah.
ANDF soldiers, because they are far from the home, they were saying.
Tigray has known too much war. They remember the war with the Derg, and they remember the war with Isaias. Even one of the things that hurts my heart and hurts the Tigray heart is when the borders opened, everybody was hugging and kissing. I even took care of Eritrean officers in Mekelle because they have no advanced medicine. They were coming, and they gave them things. They gave Eritrean things. They said, "Here, take this back." And now to see these same people carrying this, but still they have hope. They have hope that peace will come. They don't want revenge. They want peace. They have just seen too much war.
This is I think the one you were talking about early on, in terms of surrounding the hospital in Mekelle and so on.
Yes.
To protect it. This happened in November, or was it?
This happened. I can't remember the exact date, but it was after a few days after they took over the city. And because that was when the Eritreans were ransacking the telegram, the telephone system, the banks, every store, taking everything they could, every piece of machinery, every product, grabbing women off the street. And the people, they did not want the hospital. The hospital is a great treasure. So, like I said, it started with calls. There was no power, but the Iman was sending over the thing, join together, protect Idar. And then the leaders heard it. And then I would say 10, 15, 20,000 people were coming out and standing guard. They covered the street with stones. Recently, I did get some pictures. There's some on Eritrea Hub that show that, where they stopped traffic where they couldn't come in with 3 blocks, and And actually, then the soldiers in the hospital got scared, and they started shooting people at random. And it was old men, women, even children. And at night they were burning tires. So and there was no power. So, but this place was lit up, and that went on for days. And finally, there were these big trucks with the Eritreans right outside this blockade, just waiting to come in. And I think the soldiers, there was about 20 soldiers, but the crowd was 10,000. And I think they just decided for their own safety to just tell the Eritreans to go away eventually.
What a touching story. This is a very heroic, by the people, amazing. So I hope, we will have a program on that with more, hopefully, videos and pictures coming out of Magaña. So as an American and who have been in Tigray in Ethiopia for 10 years, how have you understood the international community's reaction so far, the Europeans, the Americans, maybe before Biden and after Biden came to power?
Well, I think it's mostly been ignored. I think people look at it that Africans always fight. I think, and I think it's taken a time. There was this initial hope that Abiy was going to be this reformist leader. Even I remember when he visited Tigray, when he came for Ashenda, which is the big holiday, the harvest holiday. People liked him, and they thought he was going to be okay. But I think people every day they're realizing the problem is in the U.S. on CNN and all that, it never makes the news anymore. I mean, it's only people like you that are bringing the news of what's happening. It's just covered up. Americans are mostly concerned with themselves, and the Europeans. There's some in the British government, as you know. There's some people that still support Abiy. The Germans, I think, are been more appreciative of what's happening there. But the United Nations says there's a problem, but they're not going to do anything. Like I wrote, I mean, aggressors know when genocide happens that they can act freely for some time before the sanctions come, and we'll have to see. I mean, he snubbed Jeffrey Feltman, and he snubbed Samantha Powers, and the issue is going to be, is the AGOA Act going to be, that's worth $444 million of income to Ethiopia. But then there's always the argument, well, is the regular Ethiopian going to be hurt? That's always the catch-22 of these things.
Yeah, like you said, when Feldman went there, he went to Asmara and then to Ankara and so on. I don't know how much successful his Ankara visit was, but there are people who are saying he went there for maybe getting drones, because as we know, the drones changed the whole power balance back in December, November.
Well, right, and they were used in the in the war in the Balkans. There's only one thing about them: they're one-use drones. They're kamikaze drones. So they're packed with a large explosive power. So you can't reuse the normal war drones. You can load rockets or bombs on them and they fly back. These are one use. They are very destructive, but they're going to cost a lot of money. You have to train the people, and now the war covers a large area. Before, before, when they were fighting the Tigray weren't exactly organized, and it was a very narrow area. So and you have to have ground forces to take ground. You can't win a war with just drones.
So the drones that were used were just one use?
Yeah, these ones from Turkey, they're one-use drones. They're kamikaze drones.
Okay.
They have a huge, they have a huge explosive charge.
But the ones from UAE that they were flying from Asab, they were not one use, right?
No, they carry rockets, and they can direct military movements. Today the UAE is going to fly 200 tons of humanitarian supplies to Mekelle airport.
So are we seeing a change in direction? Given that UAE and Turkey don't necessarily see eye to eye and so on, are we seeing a shift in who is working for who and with who?
Well, I think, Abiy is kind of playing an unusual game. His mother was Muslim, but he doesn't seem to like Muslims. I mean, the Nagash mosque is very famous. It's a shrine for the Muslims. The other problem he has is that Eritrea aligned with him about the dam, and all the Arab countries are siding with Egypt and Sudan, and he's got a problem with Sudan now. Sudan is now hosting the opposition forces planning to go into Eritrea. So the problem Abiy has, he has very few friends left. He's losing the United States, he's losing Europe, he's losing the Arab states. Turkey is I used to do some teaching there many years ago. I mean, it's going through changes, and the Aragon is gradually kind of moving towards Muslim fundamentalism. Instead of being sort of a fascist state, instead of being like a Syria, and he doesn't want to upset that. I think, and one of the things that some people are saying is that conversation was mischaracterized. That what he really wants is guarantees for Turkish products. That he's not so, and that the likelihood that he's going to sell anything to Ethiopia, which is now bankrupt, he's not going to lend out millions of dollars of materials for nothing. So he may be trading it for some sort of trade of taking Turkish products. Turkey makes refrigerators, they make clothes. You see a lot of them in Addis. He may want some kind of guarantees, but that's just speculation. But some people are talking about that.
Yeah, in fact, the way it has been reported is like the president of Turkey even kind of offered to mediate the conflict with Tigray, as they call it. So there is a different way of reporting it, while the Ethiopian government affiliated media are saying that or emphasizing there is a military agreement and so on. So talking about losing the US and so on. Actually, Abiy Ahmed is closing, as we speak, 31 embassies in different countries, including Canada, and all this diplomatic capital that has been accumulating, over the years, which has been successful, I must say, in different ways, is now being lost, being eroded by his actions and inactions in Tigray and elsewhere. Before we head to the final question, I just want to make an advertisement for our upcoming program. So on Saturday, August 21st, let me do it in Amharic because this will be in Amharic anyway. So Kadame, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, ከጸጋይ አራርሳ ጋራ የኮቫዲስ ኢትዮጵያ and its constitution ትግራይ and ኦሮሚያ በሚል ከጸጋዬ አራርሳ ጋር ላይቭ እናወራለን 10 AM ኢስተርን ታይም ቅዳሜ። ስለዚህ ብዙዎች እንዲዳረስ ሼር አድርጉ፣ ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ፣ ላይክ አድርጉ። ከጸጋዬ አራርሳ ጋር ቅዳሜ 10 AM ኢስተርን ታይም ኦገስት 21 ማለት ነው ላይቭ እንገባለን። So, Professor Tony Magaña, we covered education, we covered health, and it's a dire situation. It's something that we don't even know in full. We don't have the full picture yet, given that still Western Tigray is under Eritrean and Ethiopian forces. We still the northern part, Europe, and so on. Might still be under Eritrean forces, and communication is totally blocked. You know, even the important people, government officials, they share satellite phones, you know, to communicate with the outside world as we speak. So we don't know even the full scale of the crime, the the humanitarian dimension, all that, and so on. So what do you see, or expect in the coming weeks and months playing out? How do you envision that playing out?
Well, I mean, it looks like the regime can't last. And I think from the TDS point of view, and I can't speak for them, but, they've got to get power. They got to get their prisoners free. I can't see that that's going to happen without going into Addis eventually. And I think what is going to happen is, and I'm confident that the leaders of Tigray are going to let journalists in and investigators in, that we're going to see that this is like an iceberg, that the terrible deaths and destruction is much greater than we can imagine. Just like it wasn't, it wasn't until the American troops got to the concentration camps that they realized what the Germans had done. Even they had to take the German townspeople into the concentration camps because they didn't believe it. And I think that there's going to be an awakening to how bad this is in the future. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm absolutely sure.
With that, because I see here with the picture, you say myself to return to its service, teaching, and research missions once again. So you kind of long, as everyone else, to go back to Mekelle, to either comprehensive hospital, and continue with your amazing service that you have been giving for years. So what would look like for you the rebuilding and reconstruction of Tigray, given that in many aspects, with the information we have, Tigray could have been or must have been, back in 30 years, ago, and so on. So how do you see the reconstruction and rebuilding of Tigray once, things are settling?
Well, I think, if we get communication, power, internet, I think help will come. I think when people, there'll be this message of what really happened. And I think good people will come to the aid, not only the diaspora, but I think aid will come. And there's, the Tigray people are a tremendous resource. There are many scholars like yourself, engineers, educators, doctors, teachers, business people, that, it's a hardworking country. There are significant mining resources in Tigray, which is one of the things I think that Isaias had his eyes on, that can be used to rebuild the nation. So how long it's going to take? I don't know. I mean, everybody thought the Tigray were down and out. We're all amazed by this resurgence. So I have a hope that a country could be rebuilt. And, I mean, it has to happen. I think the drive is there. But I think, this conflict has to end. And every day that it goes on, more are dying from all those things, not just the casualties of war. And once it ends, then the rebuilding can start. I think I believe, I have faith that it can happen. I mean, Tigray are hardworking people. They believe in their country. They're tough. They've been through a lot, and they will work to rebuild the country.
I totally agree with that, and there is no question about the need for rebuilding it better and faster, and that's how we can also pay back in terms of the enormous sacrifices that are paid by the farmers that have seen, incalculable and unspeakable atrocities by these evil forces. So it was a great pleasure for me to speak to you on UMD Media today, Professor Tony Magaña, and I really hope when we meet next time, we will have more better news, and we'll be in a better position at least to speak about the victims. What I have seen from the Ethiopian side is the consistent ignoring of the victim's story, undermining it, ignoring it, justifying it, and so on. So we will speak until the last breath in terms of the victims, the voiceless victims of Tigray under Tigray genocide. Thank you so much for your time. If there is any last word you want to speak, I will be pleased.
Thank you, and I think you're doing, you're getting the story out that needs to be told. I mean, these are good people. They're Christian, good Christians, good Muslims, hardworking people that just want to have a good life. I mean, they don't have any big territorial wishes. We have to help them.
Great. Thank you so much, and have a good one.
All right. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye. You have been following my conversation with Professor Tony Magaña. He is a professor and neurosurgeon who was active in Ethiopia, in Tigray specifically, for the past 10 years, and he's now in Florida. And before I finish today's program, I want to again do the ad for Saturday. ጸጋ አራርሳ ጋራ በኢትዮጵያ ወዴት ህገ መንግስቷና ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት ትግራይና ኦሮሚያ እንደማሳያ ቅዳሜ ላይቭ እንገባለን በ10 AM ኢስተርን ታይም ሶ ላይቭ በኤምዲ ሚዲያ ለብዙዎች እንዲደረስ ሼር አድርጉ፣ ላይክ አድርጉ። ሰብስክራይብ ያላደረጋችሁ ደግሞ ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ። የዛሬው ዝግጅት ይህን ይመስል ነበረ። ያስተናገርኳችሁ ጌታቸው አሰፋ ነበር። ባይ ፎር ናው።